Hey guys, Stealth here. This deck review is about a French general deck. It was sent in by Volgar the Viking, and it's a general deck that's supposed to be able to do anything. It's a deck that can be used in 10v10s, 1v1s, 2v2s, everything that you can think of, even low point tactical games. Now, that's the description that Volgar the Viking gave, and it's something that I definitely do not agree with. I don't think that you should be able to create, or that you should be using a deck for any kind of situation. The reason for that is that those decks will suffer in one way or another. They're going to be lacking command units, they're going to be lacking resupply units, they're going to have too much infantry for some maps and too little for others. So what I'm going to do is rebuild this French general deck a little bit to make it suitable for, say, 2v2 to 4v4. I'm going to make this for both open and closed maps, but not for 10v10s, because in 10v10s it's my opinion that you need either a mechanized motorized deck for the middle or an airborne / armor / general deck for the outsides of the map. So this one's going to be 2v2 to 4v4. That means we're going to need a decent amount of infantry, although not too much. Quite a bit of vehicles and tanks, because you want to be able to bridge those gaps. Some artillery, and the more general stuff like AA, anti-tank helicopters and anti-tank vehicles or airplanes. Anyway, let's get into it. Command unit wise, he has one VAV PC, good choice. It's a solid unit, 125 points, which I think is on the cheap side, considering that some other units which also carry one armor on every side are more expensive, but okay. He has one fob and one card of VLRA Logistics. Something I'm missing here is another card of Puma 330Ls, because these VLRA Logistics take forever to go back to your fob if they are on a very big map. Now, I know that the maps for 4v4 don't tend to be as big as a 10v10, but it can still take you a long time to get these supplies to the front line, so we need to make room for these VLRAs, for the Puma 330s. So we need to steal some points from somewhere, and let's see where I can do that. First off, he has some Milan F3s. Now, these are nice all-round units, but their accuracy and range are not that good. So you can either go with having these units as a throwaway unit, where you don't mind losing them too much, or you can use them in a position where you're going to say, no, I don't want to throw away these units, I want to save them, I want to make sure they can be still combat capable, and to do so I'm going to upvet them. In this situation I'm going to use as many as possible, so I'm not going to change them into 5, and the reason for that is that because you just don't know what kind of situation you're going to get into. Next up, Commander Marines in the Panther, nice for land grabs. One problem is that he does not have a very high number of them. I want to have more of these, so I'm going to downvet them. Reason for that is that I want to have 7. With 7 you gain a little bit more combat capability, and you gain 2 more Panthers, which are nice helicopters to have. So downvetting those to 7. Some AA infantry, Mistrals, again lower veterancy. These guys I'm again a bit torn about, going with either veterancy or not. It's a bit of a standoff. You can go for higher accuracy but lower amount of units, or more units and less accuracy. The situation I'm just going to leave it as is, because as mentioned I don't know exactly what kind of situation I'm going to be facing. Then he has 20 Legionnaires, or 20 units of course. They are Legionnaire 90, that means that they have the Erics. It's a very good anti-tank weapon. Keep in mind though, it's a guided weapon. That means you need to keep an eye on the target, and it is not going to detonate like a standard RPG or AT weapon. If it suddenly loses sight of the target, it's going to fly off like all ATGMs do. And for that purpose I might switch, or actually I will switch one of these legions back, or Legion 90s back to a standard legion group. The difference being that they carry the LRAC F1 instead of the Erics. Erics is a great anti-tank weapon, but as mentioned guided. LRAC F1 is pretty much your standard RPG. It does 19 armor penetration, which is enough to take care of most. Rate of fire is good. And they both carry the FAMAS and the AA-52 versus the Mini-Me. Mini-Me is, I believe, slightly better at engaging infantry because it's a CQC weapon that has a higher rate of fire. The AA-52 though fires a bigger caliber round and gives it more suppression, so that might be a reason why the AA-52 is better, but again, I'm no expert on machine guns and the super specific stats of these units. Anyway, I'm going to add in some legions, and I want those with the VAB 2013 to give it an autocannon. Actually, let's take those back to hardened. That should be well enough. Supports. He has the VPM 120s. I'm not sure if these are the best choice, but for a mortar they are nice. They're fast, they got a bit of armor. They have 54 rounds on the vehicle, and that means that you are pretty likely not to have to bring in any more armor or any more supplies for these. Good range, very low dispersion. Accuracy is something that the French do very well, and they have a pretty high HE value. Then 10 Roland 3s. This is, by the looks of it, his main anti-air unit. They can do both anti-helicopter and anti-airplane, and that makes the Roland a very nice all-round unit. The one unit that I'm not seeing in here yet though is an AA unit in the form of a SPAG. Now I know that the French don't exactly get a good SPAG, the only one that you're getting is the VAB VDAA. But with these things you are pretty likely to stun the enemy if you deploy, or if you can fire enough rounds at them fast enough. So what I'm going to do is throw at the Crotals for this situation and bring in a couple of those VAB VDAAs. Then he has one Caesar. This is, it may not look impressive, but it's actually one of the best howitzers in the game. Fast rate of fire of 6 rounds a minute, whereas normal howitzers have a rate of fire of 4 to 6. Range is great at almost 34 kilometers. Dispersion is low. HE value is 7 is well enough. The one thing you need to keep in mind is the ammo supply, since they only carry 18 rounds. Moving on to tanks. He has the Leclerc, as is a mandatory unit. It's the main battle tank for the French, or super heavy if you will. It is not as super well armored as some of the other tanks are. It has 20 frontal armor, versus for example 22, 23 for some of the other super heavies that are in the game. That means that medium to heavy guns from the enemy team will penetrate this tank. So use it in quick assaults, and by quick I mean get out of cover, fire a couple of rounds at the enemy, get back into cover. Firing fast is something that this tank does very well, with a 12 round a minute rate of fire on this main gun. It is an autoloader, and that means that it will continue to keep up this rate of fire even if the unit's panicked. But of course the accuracy will go down. Next up, some AMX-40s and some AMX-30B2s. Something to keep in mind, something that I lately discovered about these units, and I never really got it, but now I do, is why the autocannon does not fire if you have the main gun enabled. The reason for that is that, unlike for example the Kyler, these things are coaxial. That means that this autocannon from, I believe all of the AMX 30 and 32 tanks, and even the 40 that you're seeing here, is mounted coaxially, so it's right there. If the turret is in rotation, it can fire, or if the main gun is used, it can fire either the main gun or the autocannon, not both. The Kyler, for example, does not have this problem, because it has a main gun and a separate turret which can rotate individually for the autocannon. So if you want to use these to suppress infantry, instead of using the main gun, just turn this thing off and the tank will switch to the autocannon. Just don't forget to turn it back on once you're actually firing at tanks, because this thing is not going to do anything against a tank. Anyway, these AMX-40s are good tanks. They have quite a bit of armor, they got a nice amount of accuracy, but as with most French units, and the only unit that is really the exception is the Leclerc, do not fire them on the move. Their stabilizer is only 30%, and with that even the AMX-40 is almost an exception, because the entire AMX-30B line does not have a stabilizer. You can only fire these from an ambush position and then run. That's what these things do best, hit and run. The AMX 40 is a nice medium all-rounder tank, and then the AMX 65 or the AMX 30B2 for 65 points is another worthy addition to the deck. Considering switching it back to the AMX 30B2, because they got the same amount of accuracy, but the Brennus for 25 points does give you more armor penetration, and a higher or a longer range on the gun, 2275 versus 2100. So sticking with the B2 Brennus here. Reconnaissance wise, let's see, pretty much all the units you'd expect here. Alouette reconnaissance helicopter, it's one of the two choices that you have. You got the Alouette 3 or you get the cannon with the Gazelle 341F. The reason I would take the Alouette is because you get very good optics instead of good optics. Yes, the Gazelle has a cannon, but is it really worth it? As far as I'm concerned, the Alouette 3 will do the job just fine. Then some VBL Mistrals. Again, pretty unimposing looking jeeps, but they will take down helicopters remarkably surprisingly well. They have 6 of those infrared Mistral missiles, and with those you can gauge helicopters and aircraft, although aircraft are a little bit harder to hit since they only have a range of 2100. These units are amphibious at 48 kph. It may not seem that important, but you can use that to engage from unexpected angles. And you can actually see the propulsor right there at the back of the vehicle. VAB Razit, these are passive scouts, if you will, or at least that's how I use them. The reason for that is that they have exceptional optics. They are 55 point units and they got almost no armor, 1 on every side. And that means that this thing is very likely to get shot once and die immediately to that round that it's going to take. So when you're using these units, be careful. They can be used on the move, but try not to have them on the front line like you would other recon. If you want to have a frontline unit, the Mistral is a better choice, because this unit I think is just too expensive to lose, especially since it's an exceptional optic vehicle. Then, Commander's Para. Again, always have some kind of reconnaissance infantry in your deck. He's dropping them off with the Pirate. I would consider dropping them with the Puma 330H as well. In this case it doesn't really matter. You get the same amount of availability. The only price point difference is 5 points if you're using the 330H. If you're using the Pirate, you're going to pay 25 points for it. Vehicle wise, this is a bit too many ATGMs, and this is also a big opportunity for me to finally get that last logistics unit that I want to get in. The AMX Hot and the Mephisto have almost the same profile. It's just a different way of getting those Hot 1 missiles to the target. You can see that the missile itself has exactly the same specs. The only difference is that the AMX Hot carries 16 versus 12 on the Mephisto. AMX Hot also has a bit of armor, whereas the Mephisto does not. But the Mephisto can go farther, can go faster. It's faster amphibious, and considering that the French are geared towards fast hit and run operations, I am going to take the Mephisto in this situation. If you don't like the Mephisto, consider going with the ERC 90 Sage, because these are nice and fast units which can support ambush operations. The Mephisto can do that to a certain extent, but the accuracy on the Mephisto is not that good. Anyway, the Mephisto, I'm going to upvet these to make sure I have 7, because I want to get that accuracy as high as possible. So back to logistics to finally get that 330H in. And then back to helicopters, where we find the Tiger, both variants, the HAD, pretty much the air-to-ground vehicle, or the air-to-ground unit, and the air-to-air with the Mistrals, the Sneb and the Jihad 30. And these are both very, very nice helicopters. If you use these in combination with a Gazelle Reconnaissance, or an Alouette in my case, then you have a pretty effective hunter-killer group. We also have some Celtics in here for fast counter-air operations. Usually you'll be using these to counter fast helo rushes, but you only get 5, so don't expect these 5 to be able to take down a helo rush, for example, if you do decide to take this deck into a 10v10. Because it is more difficult to use only 5 Celtics with 4 missiles apiece, so you can fire 20 missiles. say with an accuracy of 60%, you might get 12 to 13 hits. And that's not going to kill out all of those Hinds and the Kulas and whatever they throw at you in a 10v10. So be careful with that. Finally, in the air, he went pretty heavy on air superiority fighters with 2 Rafales at Elite. Very, very good fighters. I went over them quite a short while ago when I was discussing the French airborne deck. They have exceptional air detection, 50% ECM, 1000 kph, as you would expect from any good fighter. The one thing that these things have that other fighters don't is a medium stealth. They are much more difficult to detect than other ASFs. 4 long-range fire and forget missiles, 6 short-range fire and forgets, which can also be perfectly well used against helicopters. Keep in mind though that this thing is fast, and that does not give it a lot of time to lock on with those missiles, so you might not be able to get a couple of good hits on helicopters. A bomber, Mirage 5F, 8 400 kilogram bombs, pretty much a carpet bomber in that role. F1CT for cluster bombing runs, and then a Mirage 111C. Now, if this is to be a general deck, then I want to have a seed plane in here, or a tank sniper. Either will do. But he does not have a tank sniper or a seed plane in here, so I'm going to delete 1 fighter. And you can go with either the Super Etendar for anti-tank operations, or the Jaguar A if you want a seed plane. Now, I can compare these of course, but they have completely different profiles, completely different roles. It is, I think, not that mandatory for this deck to have a seed plane, because you only have 7 to 9 aircraft, considering I will be going for the Super Etendar. And if you only have this low amount of aircraft and don't really rely on helicopters heavily, you don't exactly need to have a seed plane. In an airborne deck, for example, it's much more mandatory because you have so many aircraft and your entire strategy relies on killing off enemy anti-air so that your units can operate well. This deck does not have that problem, so that's why I'm not going with a seed, but instead an upvetted Super Etendar SCM, which already has a base accuracy of 70%, and we can boost this to about 80-85. Finally, naval, he went with quite a few ships, but I don't really agree with the setup here. 1 Congo is not going to survive on its own, but it has a couple of Lafayettes for escorts. The problem with the Lafayette is that it does not carry a large amount of defensive weaponry. It does have the Crotal CN2 that you see on the right column right here. These are the defensive tags, so they can be used to shoot down missiles. If this ship runs out of these missiles, it's pretty much done as far as AA is concerned. Because while the main gun also has a def tag, they can be used for anti-missile defense. It is not really the best unit to do so. So when you use Lafayettes, always bring a resupply ship, because otherwise you're just going to run into trouble. He also has a Bake Nu, which is a ship, considering that he has the Congo in here, that is completely superfluous. The reason for that is that the Bake Nu is pretty much it's an air defense corvette, as they call it. These things are coasters. They can get closer than the Congo, but the Congo doesn't need to get as close to still be able to engage helicopters and airplanes. And the Bake Nu, if it fires all of these 12 missiles, is just going to be one big floating nothing. Because the Mark 34 naval gun is not that interesting. It has a 2800 meter range, it has 28 rounds a minute of rate of fire. But the problem that I have with this unit is that I'm going to run out of weaponry pretty quick. And then you're going to end up with the dual M2 Brownings, so definitely not a Bake Nu for me. What I do want is an LCU. As mentioned, I want to be able to resupply those units. I don't think that we're going to need Monitor 105s. The reason for that is that we already have 2 of those Caesars in the support tab. And that means that you don't really need to have a Monitor 105, which is pretty much a naval floating battery. So in this situation I'm going to go with another card of Lafayettes. I'm going to go with 3 Rookie. And then STRB 90H for closer operations or even river operations. With those Hellfires and the Mark 19 grenade launchers, they can really be annoying for ground vehicles that happen to get too close to the shores. So this is the French general deck that I would build, that I would go with. As mentioned, I still don't agree with having a deck that can do anything, ranging from a 1v1 to a 10v10. So, Volgar the Viking, if you're watching this replay or this deck review, please consider making a separate deck for separate situations. Because there are just situations in the game that this deck will not be able to excel at. And in that situation, you might not get the amount of points that you need, you will not be able to have the units that you want. And that is going to impact your gameplay and your team. So, that means that this is the end of the video. If you want me to have a look at your deck, send it in through the link down in the description. Hope you liked this video. If you did, please hit like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so, and I'll be seeing you soon.